Welcome to Building Loyalty Through Effective Rewards and Recognition with Greg Mazzuco from Augeo. Greg Mazzuco is the VP of Engagement Strategy at Augeo, helping top brands connect with the people most vital to their success. With nearly 3 decades of experience, including 16 years focused on heavy equipment dealerships, he specializes in integrating rewards, recognition, incentives, loyalty experiences, community, data, and marketing communications to craft tailored solutions that drive meaningful impact. Welcome to the virtual stage, Greg.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here. Thanks to the Satisfied team for inviting me to be part of this summit. I'm looking forward to sharing some insights that I hope you'll find valuable, and also to picking up a few insights from some of the other great presenters that are lined up here today. So let's go ahead and jump in. I've got just a quick agenda outline to help you understand where we're going to navigate here in this session. I'll give you just a real brief background on our organization. Then we'll dive into talking about what I think is an important question for some folks is does recognition really matter? Does it actually move the needle from a business impact perspective, or is it just a nice thing to do? So we'll talk a little bit about that and some of the research that's available to inform that. Then we'll talk a little bit about the different forms of recognition and reward. There's a lot of different ways to come at this, a lot of different tools at your disposal. And then we'll dive in a little more specifically into some of the real life impacts that we're seeing in the dealership. Ahead, Michelle, and you gave me a great introduction there, so we can even just skip this slide here. I'll give you just a real quick background on our organization, Augeo. We're a group of about 500 people who wake up every day just thinking about how to help our clients better engage the people that matter the most to their business. And so we partner with over 100 of the global Fortune 500 companies, in many cases working with manufacturers who are going to market and partnering with dealer organizations. But we do also work directly with a number of individual dealer organizations as well. We work across the globe, and we've got an extensive set of capabilities that I won't really get into too much today, other than to touch on a couple examples as we go along through our agenda. But certainly glad to have any follow-up conversations if we can be support to anything that you're trying to accomplish here going forward. All right, so with that, let's talk a little bit about this question of does recognition really matter to the business? And so if we click ahead here, we're going to have our first poll of the day. Michelle alluded to this, and I'd like to have a little fun, a little bit of interactivity here. 31% is kind of a magic number, and this is a little bit more of a pop quiz here. And whoever is the first person to correctly answer this question is going to receive a $25 Amazon gift card. We got to bring a little bit of reward fun into this conversation. So we're going to do that. And then anybody who responds to all three of the polls we're going to do here today will also be entered to win another gift card as well. So the question here to get us started is 31% represents which of the following? A, is it the percent of employees in the US who receive recognition from their employer each year? B, is 31% of employees in the US who are currently looking for a new job? C, is it the percent of employees in the US who are engaged at their work? Or D, is it the percent of companies in the US who offer a formal recognition program for their employees? So please go ahead, make your selection, and we'll see what folks think this important 31% number represents. And Michelle, I don't know if we're going to be able to see that right away, or if we've got to wait for that, but you tell me if
Yep, I can see. So far, we've gotten 26% of respondents on A, 9% of respondents on B, and then kind of split here at the bottom, 30% on C, and 35% believe it's D.
All right. Well, it's a close race. Those of you who selected C, are correct. If we go to the next slide, give a little more context around that. So 31% is the number of U.S. employees who are engaged per the most recent Gallup research on employee engagement that came out in January. So this is pretty fresh information. And you can see on the right side here the graph of how this has trended over the time. And so what this means is that if you're a typical company, and I hope y'all are doing better than these numbers, but if you're typical, it means that 7 out of 10 employees within your organization are not engaged, which is sort of a staggering thing to consider. And when we think about those 7 out of 10, about 5 of those, or 52% overall, are just not engaged. They're just not doing anything more than they need to do. No, kind of additional discretionary effort more than it takes to not get fired. 17% are what Gallup calls actively disengaged, which means they're actually working to actively undermine your business and the things that you're trying to accomplish. So employee engagement is something that has a lot of upside, and is certainly something that can be a major competitive differentiator if you can get just a little bit better at it. If we click ahead here, we'll talk a little bit more about that impact that engagement can actually have on your business metrics. So this is also from Gallup, and what they've done here with these statistics is they've taken the top quartile of companies in terms of how their employee engagement scores and compared them to the bottom quartile of companies on a number of different metrics here. And I'm not going to go through all these, but I will highlight a few. Looking at turnover, for example, organizations that have higher employee engagement tend to have turnover that's as much as 51% lower than organizations with lower employee engagement. They tend to have less theft, 63% fewer safety incidents, better quality. They tend to be 10% better in customer loyalty and engagement, which is obviously a critical metric overall, and something that I know is near and dear to a lot of the folks on this call. Sales productivity, 18% higher, 23% more profitable. And so, what we find, and I think this isn't shocking to anybody, but companies that have more employees who are highly engaged get more done and do better work and have happier customers and sell more and make more profit. And so if we believe in that, if we click ahead to the next slide here, I want to propose to you that one of the key things that can drive engagement and improve those employee engagement scores is recognition. Employees who are satisfied with how they're recognized at work, according to the Incentive Research Foundation, are many times more likely to give that extra effort and do their best on a day-to-day basis. They're more likely to be satisfied with their role and their responsibilities. They're more likely to stick around and not hop to another job. And retention is certainly a key issue in a lot of dealership organizations. They're also more likely to recommend your company to a prospective recruit or potential new hire. And so these are really important factors, I think, for a lot of businesses and key metrics that have a strong correlation to recognition activity and the extent to which employees feel like they are appreciated and recognized in their work. From McKinsey, one of the foremost consulting firms in the world, they did deep research a couple years ago on what are the factors that have the greatest impact on employee engagement. And they looked at everything across a bunch of different dimensions, everything from the influence of management and training and compensation and all these different elements. And the single greatest factor that they found that drove employee engagement was being recognized for one's work. And specifically, this is non-monetary recognition. So this isn't about getting paid more. And I think this is that's an area where people often get tripped up as thinking that it's just about it's just about compensation. But this was specifically around non-monetary recognition. And so just a really, really compelling bit of research that underscored what we had, kind of seen in some other places, but to have that come out as the single number one factor was something that really, really, caught our attention in that research. The one other thing I'd point out here just really quickly is kind of this distinction definitionally between recognition and reward. I mean, recognition is I think we can broadly define it as anything that we're doing to recognize or appreciate someone's contributions. That could be as simple as just giving someone a high five or giving them a shout out in a meeting or town hall. It doesn't necessarily have to have a reward attached to it. And it is possible too for reward to not really be recognition. If you think about potentially giving somebody just maybe they get a bonus in their paycheck, but nobody ever acknowledges it or says anything about it. The best cases, of course, or the most impactful often are those cases where you're combining recognition and reward with a meaningful message and also something of financial value. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment here. This is a couple stats from a recent study here in 2024 that really looked at what makes employees love where they work. And so if you're an organization that wants employees to love where they work, this might be of interest to you. 94% of employees who felt appreciated in their work also loved where they worked, while only 18% of those who felt either unappreciated or neutral at work loved where they work. And so, the takeaway for me from this was it's almost impossible for someone to feel very appreciated at work and not love where they work. And that I think is a really powerful endorsement for the importance of appreciation and recognition of employees. This, I think, is a really important lens through which to look at this as well. Ryan alluded earlier to some of the generational dynamics that we're seeing in the workplace, and there is an expectation from the younger generations in the workplace about receiving communications and receiving feedback much more frequently. And so we're doing a lot of work to encourage and enable that kind of frequent recognition. It can't be something that is just happening at an annual review or even just at a weekly or biweekly one-on-one. It's become increasingly critical to be recognizing folks in a more of a real-time basis. And so the graphs here on the chart start from the left with younger millennials, Gen Z, and then older subsets of those generations, and then Gen X and boomers across to the right, where it's meaningfully less critical from their perspective, but still important to a lot of people in those older generations. I think the other thing that's worth noting here on this chart is the pink lines are people who want to be recognized by their peers. So recognition isn't just about a manager or some senior person in an organization conveying appreciation to someone else on their team, but we're seeing an increasing appetite for and a lot of increasing value in peers calling out each other for their contributions, for their support. Kind of goes back a little bit to some of the comments earlier about camaraderie and building teams and really getting people to work together collectively. Being able to recognize each other and extend that appreciation effectively on a day-to-day basis can really help to fuel a lot of that camaraderie that organizations are looking for.
Hey, Greg, I don't think I got pre-approval to interrupt you, but I saw this slide and I just had to say something and jump in.
Yeah, please.
What I love your perspective on this. The baby boomers don't seem to need a lot of frequent recognition. Gen Xers, not a lot too. Younger millennials, Gen Zs, older millennials, Gen Zs, definitely. So, but I think that the boomers and the Gen Xs are managing, not in all cases, right? Are managing the
Yeah.
millennials and the Gen Zs. What do you think that impact is?
It's a great call out. I do think there is often a disconnect between the people who are tending more often to be in those senior leadership positions from the older generations, and they're looking at things through their own lens, their perspective, and how they feel about recognition, as opposed to understanding those on the receiving end and some of the younger folks in the organization. And I will say, and I have a chart on this here a little bit later that will help to convey this. But I will say, in my earlier days of working with dealer organizations, there was a lot more of what I would call kind of the old school mentality of, hey, look, these people are lucky to just have a job and get a paycheck. I'm not going out of my way to give any special appreciation or recognition, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen that wane over the years, and I do think there has been an evolution there. But I think your point is still a good one. I think it's important for those of us that are maybe slightly on the older end of the scale to make sure we are thinking about things through the eyes of those that we're working with and who are parts of our organizations, as opposed to just thinking about things through our own lens.
Love it. Thank you. Sorry to bust in on that. That's just one of
Great.
those things that I think we need to call out, that how we feel and how we get recognized isn't what the younger generation is looking for. And if we don't make changes, we're going to have trouble on retention.
100%.
All right. Thanks.
No, thank you, Ryan. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the different forms of reward and recognition. And this certainly won't be exhaustive, but I want to be able to sort of identify all the different flavors that this comes in, and really underscore the fact that there's no one way of doing this. So, Michelle, if you'll click ahead to the next slide. When we think about why are companies and why are individuals within organizations recognizing others? I mean, there are a lot of different reasons, right? This is a little bit of a word cloud that kind of underscores, I think, which things we're seeing most commonly. Years of service is a really interesting one. It's still probably the most common thing that people get recognized for. But what's interesting about this is that in today's world, if you think about traditional years of service where you get recognized at your 5 or 10 or 15 or 20-year anniversary, a lot of employees aren't sticking around companies that long. They never get to a 5 or a 10. And so, we've seen companies begin to shift towards both recognizing some of those, 10-year milestones at smaller increments, but also really realizing that, that we need to catch people doing stuff right, much more often, much more in the moment. And so, that really kind of leads us to the other things that we see people getting recognized for, whether that's great service or, glowing customer feedback, or, above and beyond, effort, supporting other members of their team, safety, adopting new technologies and processes. The list goes on, sales performance, obviously, and all the rest. But there's a lot of different reasons that people are recognizing, and that's appropriate. There's a lot of different things that people are contributing on a day-to-day basis within their work environments. If we go to the next slide, we talk a little bit more about how recognition is given. And the reality is that recognition can be very informal, can be very formal and structured. It can be somewhere in between, and there are a lot of ways to tailor this. If we think about physical recognition, for example, it can be as simple as writing someone a note of thanks. It could be giving them a reward card. There's formalized programs where people may be getting trophies or plaques or certificates. Some of the maybe kinds of recognition that we might consider a little bit more traditional, but still has a place, and there's ways to do it in a more modern way. You might give people some sort of merchandise reward as a recognition gift. There's a lot of digital options, right? So we have tools, and some of them you can see on the kind of right side of the slide here, where people can send e-cards to others in their organizations. We see a lot of dealers doing social posts, calling out employees either for a major 10-year milestone, or because they just achieved a certain level of certification, or maybe they did something really really great to contribute to their community. We're seeing dealers use that social channel a lot more in some of those recognition activities. Badges, whether digital or physical. We do a lot with points and rewards, and we're also seeing a lot more opportunities to do integrations with like Teams or Outlook or Slack or other tools that people are working in each day, where we can integrate that with a broader recognition program and just make it easier to meet people where they are, and take some of the friction out of making sure that they can give that real-time recognition. And then live interactions, right? So, like I said, whether it's giving somebody a high five or talking to them and giving some feedback in a one-on-one or a public shout out, taking them to dinner, or, bigger events or, trips. I think, like incentive trips or big experiences where people are being brought together to be recognized for their contributions. I mean, these are all very legitimate ways of expressing recognition, depending on the situation and who's involved. I think that the important things to keep in mind here are to be when you it's so much about the message and the way that you convey and deliver the recognition or the reward. Be specific about why you're giving it. Try to be timely and immediate in giving it, and personalize it as much as you can. That personalization can make just a massive difference in how that recognition is received and internalized. Again, this isn't about just managers. Peer recognition can be really powerful, so we need to think about it that way too. And then, I'd say if you're thinking about giving rewards to people as part of their recognition, really prioritize novelty when selecting rewards. I think there's there's a tendency to just do what's easiest and just say, we'll just drop a cash bonus into your next paycheck. But that can really get lost. It's not very necessarily that interesting or compelling if it's being offered as an incentive before the fact, and it doesn't tend to get remembered and talked about after the fact. And so a lot of the value that comes from a good recognition reward experience is lost if you're doing something like that. So really think about things that could be unique, different things people wouldn't do or get on their own. Those can be some of the most compelling reward opportunities that you might put forth, folks. Flipping over just a little bit to employee incentives, I just want to touch on, we see dealers run a lot of kind of objective performance-based reward programs and promotions. And, I think the things that we tend to see most often in this area with dealers are, structurally giving points or giving dollars in many cases on like a per unit or per activity basis, or giving, like increasing rewards as people, maybe move up the performance curve. We see and support a lot of goal-based programs where a particular target is given, and then we track progress towards those. And then if people hit that target, they get a particular reward. We see a lot of ranking-based programs or like kind of top performer structures where maybe there's a leaderboard and people are in competition. Those kinds of ranking-based programs can be really effective in terms of just kind of cultivating a little bit of that friendly competition, getting people talking about it, and just keeping people's engagement and focus on a particular competition, whether it's around sales or some other activity. The one thing I would caution with those kind of competitive ranking-based programs is if you're just rewarding the top people in the top few slots, what you'll often find is that there'll be a significant portion of your audience that doesn't think they're going to be one of the top few, and so they just won't engage at all. And so what we often counsel our clients on when we're designing incentive programs like this is to actually combine these structures. So for example, you might say, hey, you're going to get X points or X dollars for hitting this goal or per unit sold or whatever it might be, but then overlay on that an additional element that says, hey, you're going to get that regardless, so you control your own destiny there. But then we're also going to recognize the top 3 or top 5 or top 10 or whatever it is in the organization, and they're going to get this special top performer award on top of that. And then you're able to kind of take advantage of the best of both worlds, where people have control and certainty about, hey, if I do this, I'm going to get rewarded. but also the benefits of the kind of friendly competition and people wanting to strive to be on top of that leaderboard. So those are a couple of things to keep in mind from a incentive structure perspective. In terms of use cases, I think what we see most commonly are things like obviously product sales, service and warranty sales, technician performance. If you have technicians, that's another area of opportunity with things like this. Mentioned earlier, tech adoption, and then certainly things around customer satisfaction. Potentially, you'd have to be a little careful with that because you want to make sure that you're not driving unintended consequences and doing something that's going to make people kind of skew results. But if you have a good way to be able to go at that, there are certainly opportunities to reward people for customer satisfaction scoring and feedback as well. So a lot of different things, a lot of different ways of recognizing, and I think it can be helpful to kind of organize these into a particular approach. This is definitely not the only way to think about it, but I think one way to think about it, one way we talk about with some of our clients is like this. So if we start at the bottom of the pyramid, we think about like day-to-day peer recognition, which might not involve any rewards or points or anything like that. It might be largely digital. But that's a really good foundation if you can kind of foster and enable that to happen in your organization. That's a really good place to start. And then kind of building on that with more manager-driven recognition, which might include like some sort of points or reward component, maybe for more substantial achievements. And there's kind of that layer of some of those promotions or incentives like we were just talking about on the prior slide. A lot of those today are handled digitally, and we're providing kind of a lot of that feedback and immediate progress reporting and reinforcement. Those are programs where if you have like some sort of reward point system, that can be a really good way to facilitate those. And then there are things that we kind of think about as like milestone moments. So, traditionally years of service would be one of these, but we also see a lot of companies taking time to, help celebrate their employees' other life moments, whether it's just their birthday or they got married or they had a baby or whatever those important milestone moments are in their employees' lives. Companies who celebrate those moments, even if they're things that are happening outside the workplace, are sending a really clear message of caring and appreciation, not just for the work output that those people are generating, but for them as people and understanding that there's more to their life than just what's happening at their workplace. So that's something that we see a lot of, and I think is a good part of the mix here. And then at the top, really have this this idea of celebrating your very best, and you want to keep those people around. Obviously, you want to keep them happy, and this is where we tend to see things like a big experience or celebratory event or incentive trips, things like that, or like major physical recognition things. That's often what we see sort of utilized in this realm of celebrating your very top performers in the organization. So one thing one call out before we jump into the next section here. Actually, we're going to do our second poll. So the question here is: last week was Employee Appreciation Week, Friday being National Employee Appreciation Day, and we just wanted to get a pulse on how many of your organizations did something special to celebrate Employee Appreciation Week last week. So again, this is our second of three polls. Please take a moment, if you will, to respond, and we'll get a bit of a feel for how many orgs were plugged into Employee Appreciation Week last week. How's it looking, Michelle?
It looks like we've got 32% saying yes, and then 66% saying no.
All right. So, kudos to those of you who kind of seized that opportunity, and for those who didn't, I think it's just good to look at the calendar, and as you're thinking about ways to cultivate recognition and employee appreciation and enhance employee experience overall, it can help to just kind of sit down, look at the calendar, and identify some different points in the year where maybe you want to do some, do some of the special appreciation events or activities, or have a little campaign. Not to say that it has to be Employee Appreciation Week, but that does certainly sort of create a very natural opportunity in this time of year, something that you can wrap some appreciation activities around. So keep that in mind for next year if it's not something that that you did last week. All right, and then really starting to dive in a little bit more to the dealer realm specifically here, and some of the real life impacts that we're seeing in our work with dealer channel programs, whether those are coming from OEMs or working directly with individual dealers. So I mentioned earlier when Ryan brought up that topic of boomers and Gen Xers and their perspectives on the importance of recognition. This is actually the results of a survey that we did probably a year and a half, 2 years ago now. But I think it really underscores the progress that's been made in leaders understanding the importance of recognition and the impact that it has on employee experience and engagement and motivation, satisfaction, and keeping people with your company. The question here was, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being extremely important, how important do you think employee recognition is to those factors of engagement, motivation, et cetera? On the left, senior managers gave the responses that came from senior managers, and on the right, frontline managers. And I think what you can see is that the bars are definitely skewed heavily towards the right side of the page. And in both cases, with senior leaders and frontline managers, the biggest bar is 10 out of 10, extremely important. And we were definitely heartened to see this. We had certainly sensed a shift through and coming out of COVID, that there was kind of a turning point that happened there, where I think there was more of an appreciation for the importance and the impact of recognition. But I think this is a good indicator, and I would guess the next time that we do this survey, it will probably have gotten even better. The one concern that I have a little bit around this, or I think the one trap that the companies could fall into, is as the competitiveness in the employee talent marketplace potentially wanes here a little bit, and maybe it becomes a little bit more of a buyer's market there. I think there could be a temptation to think that maybe recognition doesn't matter as much anymore, and I think that would be a mistake. I think there's always an opportunity to differentiate your company by creating a great employee experience, and if a big part of that is recognition, then that's something that should really be a consistent, sort of steadfast part of your employee experience recipe for your organization. We also did some analysis in a couple different dealer channels where we looked at turnover rates, and we compared these turnover rates to the recognition activity or lack thereof of the people in the dealer channels. And so in the first dealer channel, what we found when we did this analysis was that among employees who had received recognition over the course of the past year, didn't even have to be a lot, just they had recognition that was trackable through the system that we were managing for recognition. Turnover among those folks who had been recognized was 8%, whereas those folks who had not received any recognition, their turnover on average was 27%. So more than a 3x difference based on whether or not these folks had received recognition. And then we looked at in the second channel, and we found similar, but even a little bit more compelling difference. So in that case, those folks who had received recognition had an average turnover rate of 10%, whereas those who hadn't had a turnover rate of over 41%, so a 4x factor. So we've seen data like this in other places, other general research, but this was I think a really interesting opportunity to look at it very specifically in the equipment dealership channels, and very specifically tied to programs that we were working on where we were facilitating recognition. And this is kind of directionally what we would have expected, but it's always interesting, of course, to see the actual results. And this is something that I think has certainly caught the attention of some of the dealers in this channel, and I think helped them to make the case sometimes within their organization that this is something we need to pay attention to, and we need to be investing energy and time and potentially some money in. Here, I just wanted to share a few examples, of actual recognitions that we see coming through our tools. For organizations that are wanting to create a culture of recognition, there's just, as we talked about earlier, so many different things that you can be recognized people for, and catching people, doing well. And I think this helps to just kind of underscore the diversity of real life examples, right? So everything from, hey, you got a 5-star Google review, congratulations on getting that from this customer, to, congrats on being a certified technician, to, hey, thanks for staying late to troubleshoot that tractor. Thanks for wearing your safety glasses if you're trying to promote safety. Great job hitting your part sales target. Clean roadside inspection from the state patrol, well done. I mean, there's so many different roles and so many different ways in which people can potentially contribute in a positive way to your organization. And I think this just underscores that in many cases, a lot of the dealers we're working with are finding ways to recognize folks within their companies, even if it's not necessarily a big, huge sort of milestone achievement. It could be something. It can be something kind of simple, like, hey, thanks for staying late. Thanks for modeling and being a mentor to others on your team and helping them understand what it looks like to do this right and treat customers well. I think it's always just helpful to see real life examples. So wanted to share a few of those with you there. One other thing I wanted to touch on is this was a new program that we rolled out for one of our automotive OEMs last year. It was a new annual dealer recognition program where it created a really nice recognition program structure across 7 distinct job roles, a lot of emphasis on parts and service. It's just kind of a quick sidebar there. I would say that while we, are definitely not seeing, vehicle or machine sales oriented reward and recognition programs going away, and don't think that they certainly should, we are seeing a greater emphasis and I think understanding of the importance of these things in the parts and service departments within dealerships, and that's a good thing. I think for a long time, those folks tended to feel a little bit left out and underappreciated, and I think that's been acknowledged, and we see a lot of dealers pivoting on that, which is really a positive thing. This program was set up to recognize employees' contributions and achievements in the areas of performance, engagement, and customer satisfaction, and the winners were told that they would receive a combination of reward points and some special branded merchandise, and for the top tier of winners, a recognition event where they would travel to be recognized by senior leaders. What I found most interesting about this is that in addition to the improvement that they ultimately saw in those 3 qualifying categories, this organization does a sentiment survey of dealership employees. And during the year last year, before we ever recognized anyone, before anyone had won this recognition program, we saw a 16% increase in the employee sentiment scores around feeling appreciated by their dealership and by the brand. And again, this was before anyone actually was recognized. So just having offered and put this program out there moved the needle significantly in terms of how these dealership employees felt appreciated. And I just thought that was such an interesting thing to be able to measure in that first year of introducing the program. And really, I think signals that there's value in having these programs even to employees who might not win or might not be recognized, they see that that your organization is caring about that. They're taking the time to pay attention, notice the work and the contributions that employees are putting in, and that alone, I think, can change the perception of employees and what they think of an organization. And then again, shifting back to incentives, just a few examples. We work with a lot of, again, OEMs and individual dealers on designing incentive programs, and we very often see double digit, if not in some cases triple digit growth results with these programs if they're designed well. And designing them well means really understanding what are the metrics, what is achievable, how do we make sure that this is communicated effectively, how do we make sure that we're providing regular progress reporting and updates. There's a lot that goes into effective incentive program design to really optimize it, but when you do it and you offer the right kinds of targeted rewards based on that growth, these kinds of programs can be extremely effective in terms of capturing dealership employee attention and really moving the needle around those critical initiatives that you want them to focus on. I also wanted to touch on something here. I think it's really easy to get focused with these kinds of programs particularly with incentive programs, but also with some of these other recognition programs as well, on the quantitative metrics and the dollar value of maybe the rewards that you're offering, things like that. And I would urge you to not lose sight of the power of creating connection, building memories, really tapping into kind of the emotional connection that can be part of creating these experiences for recognition. And we find in many cases that experiences are the most powerful form of recognition. We do a lot of work in dealer channels with creating recognition events, whether that's like an incentive trip to a beach destination, or taking a group of folks to a NASCAR race as part of their recognition experience, or a reward for an incentive program that they were part of. Or a few years ago, we had a chance to take a group of dealership folks to the first Field of Dreams game up in Dyersville, Iowa, where the Yankees played the Chicago White Sox out in the middle of the cornfield there. And those experiences are something that not only motivate people in the run-up and during a qualification period for a program, for example, and then that they really love as they're experiencing it, but there's also this just incredible tale of impact where in the months and years ahead, and sometimes decades ahead, they still talk about it, they still think about it, they these are memories that they carry with them, and the connection and the bond that creates with those they shared it with, and the folks who gave them that opportunity to have that experience, is something that's really hard to match. And so if you have programs in place, or you're considering having some of these sorts of experiential reward and recognition opportunities, I just really would strongly encourage you to consider doing them, at least in select cases, for kind of those top performer scenarios. I truly believe is the most powerful form of recognition when it's done well. All right, so I hope that by now you're believing that engagement is important, that recognition matters and can have an impact on that engagement. You've seen a little bit about the different forms that this can take, and we've talked a little bit about the impacts that we see directly in dealerships. So if you're asking yourself, okay, well, that's great, but now what do I do? I'd like to offer a couple suggestions here based on, depending on your situation and where you're starting. I would say that if you're already doing some of this, you already have some recognition programs and tools or good reward programs in place, the next thing to do or to keep in mind is, you know, avoid getting into an autopilot mode. It's really important that these things not get stale. You've got to keep them fresh. That's about communications. That's about running some of those special campaigns throughout the year. It's you know, tying them into new business initiatives and whatever evolving priorities you might have within your business. But keep them fresh. Keep breathing life into them. You know, it takes care and feeding. If you just put it out there and you never touch it again, it's not going to have the impact you want it to have. And measure the impact. You know, find ways to understand whether it's surveying or whether it's focus groups or whether it's looking at impact results from incentive program. Find ways to measure the impacts so that you can understand what's working and what isn't, and then refine your approach and close those gaps that you might have as you move forward. So there's kind of this continuous improvement cycle with this, like so many other things in business. So just if you're doing something, you know, try to take some of these measures and maybe do a little bit more and continue to build the momentum that you've gotten started. If you haven't taken that step and you're wondering, well, what do I need to do to be successful and, you know, kind of starting down this path, there's a few areas that you might have questions about, and we often get these from you know, clients that we're talking to. One is around technology. You know, do I need a special technology tool or platform to do this right? And I would say that if your team is small and, you know, you're all in one place, you're not very spread out, then you may not need any special tech. If that's not your situation, then I'd encourage you to check and see if one of your OEMs offers tools that you can use at low or no cost to facilitate some of these recognition and reward programs within your dealer organization. And if that's not the case, you know, there are you know, a number of SaaS tools that are available. We offer them. There are other companies that offer them, and so you definitely have some options available to you if that's something that you want to look at. You know, do you need special expertise? I would say that having somebody who can help you that has experience and understands best practices can make a difference. Many providers of recognition technology will also help provide some of that guidance to help you optimize. So you might, if you're working with someone in the space, you might get some of that guidance as part of the package. I would say that, you know, it's worth making sure you've got somebody who's done this before, helping you establish your success metrics and, you know, figuring out your baselines and being able to kind of measure that impact over time. And then, you know, leadership support. I would really underscore this as a super critical success factor. Employees notice if the leaders in your organization are really participating, if they're setting the tone, if they're leading by example, or if this is something that, you know, ends up just being seen as maybe an HR initiative, but not something that the leaders in the organization are really plugged into. Employees will sniff that out. And so I would just say it's really important to have that leadership involvement to optimize success. And obviously, if you want to capture you know, create some budget and some investment for your program, getting that leadership support from that perspective is really key too. So that kind of segues into this conversation of budget. Do you need a budget to make progress on and have a meaningful recognition program and experience within your organization? So what I would say is you can make progress without one, but there's kind of this magic 1% tipping point, 1% of payroll. And this has actually been studied quite a bit. The stats that you see on this slide here are from a SHRM, Society of Human Resource Management study a few years back. And what they found is that the bars here are green is indicating that a company is a good place to work, and the light blue is a best place to work. And what they find is that companies who invested 1% or more in their recognition programs are 3 times more likely to be considered a best place to work. So, you know, obviously there are a lot of factors that go into that, but there seems to be a really strong correlation here between that recognition investment and being a best place to work. And that brings us actually to our third poll of the day, which is what percentage of payroll, if you know, if you don't know, maybe you can guess, does your organization allocate to a recognition budget? Is it zero? Is it something between 0 and 1? Or are you part of an organization that's investing a little bit more heavily at that 1% or higher level? So if you don't mind, go ahead and give us a response there, and we'll see what the distribution looks like among the dealer audience here on that perspective as well.
It looks like, Greg, we've got about 16% with the 0%. For more than 0 but less than 1, we've got 68% of the respondents. And then 1% or more, we've got 16%.
Great. That's probably about what I would have expected, but it's always interesting to see where the numbers actually come out. So thanks everyone for sharing and for participating in these polls. We will after the sessions today follow up with our winners and get you your gift cards. Thanks for participating here actively in our session. So if we'll move on to the next slide here, Michelle, I did want to talk specifically, just really briefly here again on the incentive reward side of things about some critical success factors. We see a lot of incentive programs, and one thing I would tell you is there is a great temptation to overcomplicate incentive programs, and let's add in just one more metric, and let's add in just one more qualifier, and it's just a very natural trap to fall into. I would just urge you to really try to keep your rules simple when you're designing incentive programs. It makes a huge difference in terms of the way that people understand and engage with them. I would encourage you to tap into the power of tangible and experiential rewards. We talked earlier about the power of experiences, the fact that novelty is important, that cash tends to get lost as a reward. And so really, just consider other more interesting things that you can offer from a reward perspective. Sustained communications. We find often that dealers are pretty good at communicating their programs up front, and then they get busy and distracted and the communications kind of tail off and people forget about the programs over time. So sustaining communications, we do offer a lot of tools that help to kind of set up those communications at the front end of the program, so you don't have to, as a owner of the program, have to keep plugging back in and doing communications on it manually. But however you go about it, that communication is key. Immediacy of feedback and reinforcement. The more you can get progress reporting and feedback in front of people, the more engaged they're going to be, the better results you're going to see. And then just really make sure that you're kind of right sizing your incentive offers. So think about the value of the behavior or the outcomes that you're looking for from people. Think about the effort that's involved, and make sure you get the right sort of caliber of reward offer out there that matches the situation that you're in. Those are some key success factors that can definitely make incentive programs a lot more effective. So just to quickly summarize, a few key takeaways: engagement drives results, and recognition drives engagement. A lot of different types of recognition and rewards. This is not a one-size-fits-all situation. These kinds of programs and tools are absolutely proven to move the needle with dealership employees specifically. And again, I would just encourage you to remember to look beyond the machine sales team and think about all the different folks within your organization and what you can do to motivate and recognize their activity and performance outcomes. And just keep in mind what an impact recognition can have on both your EX, which comes first, and ultimately your CX. and the impact that that can have on your customers and their experience working with your organization. So with that, glad to take any questions that there might be.
Yep, we do have a question for you. Do you have any recommendations on how to deal with many rewards having to be recorded as payroll benefits? It can cause a positive situation into a negative experience. The team member doesn't like that it has to be captured as income benefits, and it dilutes the value of the reward with tax implications.
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, and a really important thing to consider. So I would say that yes, in most cases, the rewards that you're giving through a an incentive program or a reward program like this are considered taxable. There are some exceptions in the U.S. For example, there are some allowances for um, or rewards that are given specific to tenure in certain increments and in certain amounts. I think at one point there were some allowances for safety awards too. I'd have to double check to make sure that's still the case. But setting those things aside, I think the best thing that you can do and what we consider a best practice is to offer a tax gross up. So, for example, if you were going to, let's say you're doing a point-based program, we do a lot of these with dealers, and you're going to give someone, um, uh, you know, $500 worth of points. Um, you might also then give them an additional um, uh, gross up in their check that just goes to tax withholdings of say, $200 to help cover the tax responsibility associated with that core reward, thus giving them more of a kind of free and clear reward experience that doesn't have that downside of the tax responsibility. One way to think about that is if you would otherwise have given that person, $750 maybe in their check for that achievement, you could instead uh, give them the 500 points, $500 with points, the couple hundred as a tax gross up. You've still spent the same amount of money, but they've gotten a specific reward or specific experience. The net is the same to you. They get the reward free and clear. So glad to talk more about that. Or there's certainly some good, I think, information online about that concept of tax gross up on reward programs. But I think that is certainly a best practice that we see with some of our client organizations, and something that employees really do appreciate, so they can fully enjoy the reward experience without any kind of a gotcha attached to it.
Great, thank you. Great question. And then one more question we have. Let's see here. With fewer employees leaving their job, is recognition less important?
Yeah. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I do think that there was a lot of, I don't want to say panic, but there was a strong reaction to the the sort of great resignation that we saw in 2020, 2021, 2022. And as a lot of employees were exiting their companies, I think companies reacted by starting to do more to recognize as a means of trying to improve retention specifically. Um, the the exit rate has slowed across most companies, and so I mentioned earlier there may be a temptation to not be as invested in recognition, but I would say that I think that's a mistake, and I would just encourage you to continue to recognize, for all the reasons we've discussed here today, the impact that it can have on employee experience and engagement rates and all the downstream business results. Even if retention isn't an issue you're trying to deal with, you want the employees that you have around still in your company to be giving their best each day, right? And feeling connected to your organization and your brand and representing you well with customers. And so even if retention is no longer an issue, I would just strongly encourage you to continue putting focus on recognition. It just makes a huge difference in culture and across so many business metrics.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely. If anybody has questions or needs help as a follow-up, this is my email address, gmazzuco augiomarketing.com. Certainly glad to help if there's anything we can do. But have enjoyed the discussion here. Appreciate everyone's participation in the polls, and look forward to the rest of the day.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. So inspiring
Pleasure.
and so impactful. We really appreciate your time and you sharing all those insights.